Chapter 1. The Assignment. Meredith Chen had exactly 47 minutes to identify the weakness in Adrian Thorne's empire before the quarterly board meeting began. She sat in the visitors' lounge of Thorne Industries' Chicago headquarters, her tablet balanced on her crossed knees, scrolling through financial reports that should have been boring her to tears. Instead, her pulse hammered against her throat. 6 months of investigation, 3 false leads, and countless sleepless nights had brought her here to the 43rd floor of a building that gleamed like a knife against the morning sky. Somewhere in these numbers was the answer. She could feel it the way her mother claimed to feel rain coming, a tightness in her chest, an itch between her shoulder blades. Focus. Meredith had built her career at Castellan Analytics on one simple truth. Everyone had something to hide, and she was relentless at finding it. Corporate espionage dressed up in a consultant's suit. Her ex-boyfriend had called it during their last fight. She'd corrected him corporate intelligence, then packed her bags. That was 18 months ago. She hadn't thought about him in 16. The numbers blurred. She blinked hard, forcing her eyes to refocus on the screen. Thorne Industries' third quarter projections showed a 2.3% discrepancy in their European holdings. Tiny, almost invisible, exactly the kind of thing that kept her employed. Miss Chen? She looked up. A woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and the kind of elegant efficiency that came from years of managing chaos stood before her. I'm Caroline Mitchell, Mr. Thorne's executive assistant. He'll see you now. Meredith's stomach dropped. I'm sorry, there must be a mistake. I'm here for the board meeting. I'm representing Castellan Analytics. Yes. Caroline's smile was polite and utterly unreadable. Mr. Thorne makes a point of meeting personally with all new consultants before board sessions. He finds it illuminating. Damn. Meredith had specifically structured her contract to avoid direct contact with Thorne. She was supposed to observe, analyze, report back to the board members who'd hired her to investigate irregularities in the company's expansion deals. She was supposed to be invisible. Of course, she heard herself say, standing and smoothing her charcoal suit. I'd be happy to meet with Mr. Thorne. The lie tasted like copper on her tongue. Caroline led her down a hallway lined with abstract art that probably cost more than Meredith's annual salary. Her heels clicked against marble floors that reflected the morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Chicago spread out below them like a game board, all clean lines and calculated moves. Meredith's specialty. The executive assistant stopped before a set of double doors made of dark wood that looked hand-carved. A word of advice, Caroline said quietly. Adrian Thorne didn't build this company by being careless. Whatever you think you know, he knows you know it. Before Meredith could respond, Caroline pushed open the doors. The office was a study in contradictions. Minimalist furniture, but warm wood tones. Massive windows, but intimate lighting. And behind a desk that managed to be both imposing and elegant, sat a man who made Meredith forget every carefully prepared opening line. Adrian Thorne was 42 according to her research, but he looked younger in the morning light, or perhaps older, in the way that mattered. Dark hair silvered at the temples, strong features that suggested Mediterranean ancestry, and eyes the color of smoke that tracked her movement across the room with unsettling focus. He didn't stand, didn't smile, simply watched her approach with the kind of attention that made her skin feel too tight. Miss Chen. His voice was low, textured. I wasn't expecting Castellan to send their best. Meredith stopped 3 feet from his desk, maintaining the professional distance. She'd perfected. I'm not sure I'm their best, Mr. Thorne. Just thorough. Thorough. He tasted the word like wine. Is that what we're calling it? Her pulse kicked. He knew. Somehow he knew exactly why she was here. Adrian rose from his chair with the kind of grace that came from absolute confidence, and Meredith realized her research had failed to mention one crucial detail. He was tall, easily 6'2", with shoulders that suggested he did more than sit behind a desk counting money. He moved around the desk toward her, and every instinct screamed at her to step back. She held her ground. Your reputation precedes you, he said, stopping close enough that she caught his scent cedar and something darker, like smoke. Castellan Analytics' most decorated investigator. 7 major corporate investigations in 4 years. 100% success rate at identifying irregularities. I provide analysis services, she corrected, proud that her voice remained steady. I help companies optimize their... You're a hunter. He tilted his head slightly, studying her with those unnerving eyes. And someone sent you after me. The words hung between them like a challenge. Meredith had faced down hostile CEOs, angry board members, even received 2 separate death threats during the Monarch Pharmaceuticals investigation. She'd learned to keep her expression neutral, her body language closed, her mind 3 steps ahead. But when Adrian Thorne reached out and adjusted the collar of her suit jacket a touch so light she almost convinced herself she'd imagined it, her mind went completely blank. "Tell me, Miss Chen," he murmured, his fingers barely grazing the back of her neck as he smoothed the fabric. "What exactly do you think you're going to find?" Heat spread from the point of contact like ink in water. Her carefully constructed mental files scattered. The statistics, the discrepancies, the prepared questions gone. She forced herself to meet his eyes. "I think you know exactly what I'm looking for, Mr. Thorne." His mouth curved, not quite a smile. "Then let me save you some time." He leaned closer, and she could feel the warmth of him, the solid presence that filled the space between them. "You won't find it." "Why not?" The question emerged shakier than she'd intended. His hand dropped from her collar to trace down her spine, so slowly she felt each vertebra respond. Her breath caught, her thoughts fragmented. "Because," Adrian said softly, his lips near her ear, "you can't think when I touch you." It wasn't arrogance, it was observation. Truth delivered with surgical precision. Meredith's hands clenched at her sides. She should step back, should deliver one of the dozen cutting responses cued in her mind, should remember that she was here to expose him, not to. "Good," he whispered against her hair. "Don't." Then he stepped away, leaving her standing in the middle of his office with her heart racing and her legendary analytical mind in complete disarray. Adrian returned to his desk, sat down, and picked up a pen as if nothing had happened. "The board meeting starts in 30 minutes. Caroline will show you to the conference room." He glanced up. "All business now. I look forward to your analysis, Miss Chen." Dismissed. Just like that, Meredith turned mechanically, walked to the door on legs that felt uncertain, and stepped into the hallway where Caroline waited with an expression that suggested she'd seen this before. As the doors closed behind her, one thought crystallized through the chaos. She was in serious trouble. Chapter 2. The Game Begins. The board meeting was a masterclass in corporate theater, and Adrian Thorne was the undisputed director. Meredith sat at the far end of the massive mahogany table, her tablet open to a blank analysis screen, and watched him command the room with the ease of someone who'd been doing this since before she graduated college. He presented quarterly projections with casual confidence, fielded aggressive questions from board members with patience that bordered on amusement, and somehow made discussing profit margins seem like the most fascinating topic in the world. She hated that she couldn't stop watching him. "Miss Chen," his voice cut through her observations, "you've been reviewing our European expansion. Do you have any preliminary concerns to share with the board?" Every face turned toward her. 12 board members, all older, all male except for 2, all radiating the kind of wealth that made her consultant's salary look like pocket change. These were the people who'd hired Castellan Analytics. 3 of them, specifically Richard Vance, Thomas Ashford, and Patricia Kensington, who suspected Adrian was hiding something in his aggressive expansion into Eastern European markets. They wanted ammunition. She was supposed to provide it. Instead, her mind replayed the sensation of his fingers on her spine, and she had to clear her throat twice before words emerged. "The numbers are interesting," she managed. "Professional, neutral. I'll need more time to complete a comprehensive analysis." Adrian's eyes found hers across the table. Something flickered in them, disappointment? No, something else. Challenge. "Of course," he said smoothly. "Take all the time you need. I've instructed Caroline to give you complete access to our systems. All of them." Richard Vance shifted in his seat. "Adrian, I'm not sure that's..." "Transparency, Richard." Adrian's smile was sharp. "If Miss Chen is here to evaluate our operations, let's not waste her time or hours with half measures. She'll have full access to financial records, operational reports, everything." He looked back at Meredith. "I trust that's sufficient?" It was a trap. It had to be. No CEO gave complete access to an investigator unless they were either incredibly stupid or incredibly confident they had nothing to hide. Adrian Thorne was not stupid. "That's very generous, Mr. Thorne," she said carefully. "I'm not generous, Miss Chen." His voice dropped just enough that she felt it in her chest. "I'm confident." The meeting continued for another hour, but Meredith absorbed almost nothing. Her mind was too busy trying to solve the puzzle that Adrian Thorne presented. He was treating her investigation like a game, and she couldn't figure out if he was playing offense or defense. When the board finally dispersed, she gathered her things quickly, hoping to avoid another direct encounter. She made it to the elevator before his voice stopped her. "Running away, Miss Chen?" She turned. Adrian stood in the hallway, jacket off, sleeves rolled to his elbows, looking more human than he had any right to. The other board members had scattered, leaving them alone in the quiet corridor. "Returning to my hotel," she corrected. "I have work to do." "Of course." He walked toward her with that same unhurried confidence. "The Greystone, right? 4 blocks east. Corner suite on the 23rd floor." Her stomach tightened. "Have you been investigating me, Mr. Thorne?" "I make a point of knowing who's investigating me." He stopped a respectful distance away, not close enough to touch, but close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "Your hotel has terrible Wi-Fi, by the way. You'll have trouble accessing our servers remotely. I'll manage." "Or," he said, pulling a keycard from his pocket, "you could use the executive workspace on 42. Private office, secure connection, access to any files you need. Caroline set it up for you this morning." Meredith stared at the keycard. "Why are you making this so easy?" "Because contrary to what Richard Vance thinks, I have nothing to hide." Adrian held out the card. "And because watching you work is going to be fascinating." She took the keycard, careful not to let their fingers touch. "I'm not here to fascinate you." "No," he agreed. "You're here to expose me, but you're going to fascinate me. Anyway." The elevator dinged, the doors opened. Meredith stepped inside and turned to face him. "You're very confident for someone under investigation," she said. Adrian's smile was slow, dangerous. "You're very analytical for someone who can't think straight around me." The doors closed on his words, leaving her alone with her racing heart and the unsettling certainty that he was absolutely right. Chapter 3. Access granted. The executive workspace was obscenely perfect. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. A desk that could seat 8 but currently held only a state-of-the-art computer system and a small pot of orchids. Leather furniture that probably cost more than her car. And complete, overwhelming silence. Meredith stood in the doorway at 7 the next morning, coffee in hand, and tried to identify what bothered her about Adrian's generosity. Everything. Everything about this bothered her. She'd spent 12 years developing instincts about when people were hiding something. CEOs who were too helpful usually had the most to hide. Full access typically meant carefully curated access, and men who touched her the way Adrian had touched her yesterday invariably wanted something she wasn't willing to give. But when she logged into the system using the credentials Caroline had emailed at 6 a.m., she found exactly what Adrian had promised. Everything. Financial records going back 10 years. Acquisition documents, internal communications, board meeting minutes, personnel files, even his personal calendar, which revealed he slept approximately 4 hours a night and drank his coffee black with 2 sugars. She shouldn't know that last detail. It felt intimate, like reading someone's diary. Meredith pulled up the European expansion files and started building her timeline. Thorne Industries had begun acquiring Eastern European manufacturing companies 3 years ago. Small purchases at first textile factories in Poland, a ceramics company in Czech Republic, then bigger targets. 6 months ago, they'd purchased a controlling interest in Novak Industries, a Serbian conglomerate with holdings across the Balkans. That's where the discrepancies started. She was cross-referencing acquisition costs against current valuations when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost declined. Then curiosity won. "Meredith Chen, you skipped breakfast." Adrian's voice was warm, casual, like they were friends instead of adversaries. "There's a cafe on 42. Caroline can show you." She glanced at her closed office door. "Are you watching me? Caroline mentioned you arrived early. I'm assuming you worked through breakfast, because that's what your profile suggests you do." "You have a profile on me? I have profiles on everyone who might damage my company." A pause. "Yours is particularly interesting." Meredith saved her work and leaned back in the expensive chair. "Mr. Thorne Adrian. Mr. Thorne," she repeated firmly. "I appreciate the workspace, but I don't need you checking on me like I'm an employee." "You're right." He sounded genuinely apologetic. "I'm not checking on you as an employee. I'm checking on you as someone who finds you interesting and doesn't want you to pass out from low blood sugar before you finish trying to destroy my reputation." Despite herself, Meredith smiled. "That's very considerate. I'm occasionally capable of consideration." Another pause, longer this time. "Have dinner with me tonight." The smile vanished. "Absolutely not." "Why not?" "Because I'm investigating you. Because you're my subject. Because it's completely inappropriate and you know it." "Those are 3 versions of the same objection," Adrian pointed out, "and none of them are the real reason." Meredith's grip tightened on the phone. "What's the real reason?" "You're afraid." The words landed like stones. "I'm not afraid of you," she said, but her voice betrayed her with a slight tremor. "Not of me." His voice softened. "Of what happens when you can't think clearly. Your whole identity is built on being the smartest person in the room, the one who sees things others miss. And I make you feel things instead of thinking them. That terrifies you." He was right. She hated that he was right. "Dinner," he said again. "Somewhere public." "My treat. We'll discuss the investigation. You can ask me anything you want on the record." "This is manipulation," Meredith said quietly. "This is interest." A beat of silence. There's a difference. She should say no. Should maintain professional boundaries. Should remember that Adrian Thorne was under investigation and everything he did was potentially calculated. "One dinner," she heard herself say. "On the record. And I'm paying for my own meal. Deal." The satisfaction in his voice was audible. "I'll pick you up at 7. I'll meet you there," she corrected. "Text me the address." After he hung up, Meredith sat staring at her phone, wondering what she'd just agreed to and why her hands were shaking. She returned to the European expansion files, determined to find whatever Adrian was hiding before dinner gave him another opportunity to make her forget why she was here. 3 hours later, she found it. Not a smoking gun. Something better, a pattern. Every company Thorne Industries had acquired in Eastern Europe had one thing in common. They'd been on the verge of bankruptcy before Adrian purchased them, and within 6 months of acquisition, every single one had become profitable. Not just profitable, thriving. Meredith pulled up employee records. No massive layoffs. In fact, most companies had increased their workforce post-acquisition. Wages had gone up, safety standards improved, community investment increased. She sat back, confused. This wasn't the pattern of corporate raiding. This was the pattern of someone actually investing in struggling communities. But that didn't make sense with the financial discrepancies that had triggered the investigation in the first place. Unless... Meredith opened a new analysis window and started tracking money flows. The discrepancies weren't missing profits. They were diverted profits. Adrian was taking money that should have gone to shareholders and funneling it back into the acquired companies. It was technically legal, barely, and it would absolutely infuriate board members like Richard Vance who expected maximum returns on investment. But it wasn't fraud. It was the opposite of fraud. It was idealism disguised as business. A knock on the door interrupted her analysis. Caroline entered with a knowing smile and a covered plate. "Mr. Thorne thought you might still be working through lunch," she said, setting down what turned out to be a gourmet sandwich and fresh fruit. "He suggested you'd prefer something you could eat at your desk." "He was right," Meredith admitted, eyeing the food. Caroline hesitated at the door. "May I offer some advice?" "Please." Adrian Thorne is many things brilliant, demanding, occasionally impossible. But he's also the most genuine person I've worked for in 30 years. She met Meredith's eyes. "Whatever you're looking for, I hope you find the truth and not just what someone paid you to find." Before Meredith could respond, Caroline was gone, leaving her alone with lunch and the uncomfortable realization that this investigation was becoming far more complicated than she'd anticipated. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Giordano's. 7 o'clock. "I promise the food is worth compromising your principles." Meredith looked at the text, at her analysis screens, at the pattern of profit diversions that painted Adrian as either a terrible businessman or something much more dangerous, a billionaire with a conscience. She texted back, "My principles aren't that easily compromised." His response came immediately. "Good. I'd be disappointed if they were." Chapter 4. Dinner and Disclosures. Giordano's turned out to be a small, Italian restaurant in Lincoln Park. The kind of place with checkered tablecloths and walls covered in family photos that had nothing to do with corporate power plays. Meredith arrived exactly on time to find Adrian already seated in a corner booth, looking devastatingly casual in dark jeans and a navy sweater that made his gray eyes look almost silver. He stood when he saw her, and she registered the small courtesy with surprise. "You're not wearing a suit," she said, then immediately felt stupid for stating the obvious. "Neither are you." His eyes traced over her emerald-wrapped dress with clear appreciation. "Although you should. You have excellent taste in professional armor." She slid into the booth across from him, grateful for the table between them. "This is your idea of public? There are 23 other diners in this restaurant," Adrian said. 3 couples, 1 family with 2 children, and what appears to be a very awkward first date near the kitchen. "Public enough? You counted?" "I noticed things," he signaled a waiter. "It's how I knew you'd worn the same suit 3 days in a row last month during the Hyperion Corporation investigation. Not because you couldn't afford others, but because you were too focused to care about clothes." Meredith's pulse kicked. "You've been researching me for a while." Since the moment Richard Vance mentioned he'd hired an outside consultant. "I'm thorough too, remember?" The waiter arrived with wine, a bottle of Barolo that probably cost more than Meredith's monthly rent. Adrian poured for both of them without asking if she wanted any, and she found herself oddly charmed by the presumption. "On the record," she reminded him. "You promised." "I did." Adrian raised his glass. "Ask me anything." Meredith pulled out her phone, opened a recording app, and set it on the table between them. "Why are you diverting profits from shareholders to fund operations at acquired companies?" He smiled. "You found it. I wondered how long it would take." "That's not an answer." "The answer is complicated." Adrian took a sip of wine, considering. "Do you know what happens to small manufacturing communities when corporations buy their factories? Jobs get outsourced, buildings get sold, communities collapse." "Exactly." He leaned forward slightly. 3 years ago, I visited Krakow for an acquisition meeting. The textile factory we were considering had been in operation for 60 years. It employed 200 people in a town of 3,000. The owners wanted to sell because they couldn't compete with cheaper labor markets. Meredith listened, her analytical mind cataloging details. "I toured the factory," Adrian continued, "met the workers. One woman, Zofia was her name, had been there 40 years. She showed me a photo of her daughter, who'd just graduated university, engineering degree, first in her family to go to college." His voice softened. "Zofia told me her daughter would have to leave Poland to find work, that the factory closing would be the end of their community. So you bought it," Meredith said quietly. "So I bought it. And then I made a choice." He met her eyes. "I could maximize profits, lay off half the workforce, and make my shareholders happy. Or I could invest in modernization, keep the community intact, and make slightly less money. You chose the community. I chose both." Adrian smiled. "Turns out, when you invest in people instead of just extracting value, businesses actually thrive. Revolutionary concept, I know." The waiter arrived with appetizers neither of them had ordered. Adrian must have called ahead. Meredith registered this detail, his tendency to plan, to control situations, and filed it away. "Your board doesn't see it that way," she said. "Vance, Ashford, and Kensington think you're embezzling. They think I'm not making them rich enough, fast enough." Adrian's voice hardened slightly. "They wanted me to strip those companies for parts. When I refused, they hired you to find evidence I'm stealing." "Are you?" "No." The word was flat, certain. "I'm reinvesting profits according to the operational discretion clauses in our acquisition contracts. It's completely legal. But it does reduce dividend payments, which is what really upsets them." Meredith reached for her wine, buying time to think. Everything he was saying aligned with what she'd found in the files. The discrepancies weren't fraud, they were exactly what he claimed. But that meant the board members who'd hired her were lying about their suspicions, or at least vastly exaggerating them. "Why tell me all this?" she asked. "Why make it easy for me?" "Because the truth is more powerful than whatever narrative Richard Vance is selling." Adrian's gaze intensified. "And because I want you to know who I really am." "Why does that matter?" "Because it matters to you." He reached across the table, not quite touching her hand, but close enough that she felt the heat of him. "You're not just an investigator, Meredith. You're someone who believes in finding the truth, not just winning cases. That's why you turned down the Sable Industries job last year. They wanted you to bury evidence, not expose it." Her breath caught. "How do you know about that?" "I told you." I'm thorough. His hand moved closer, fingertips brushing her wrist. And I pay attention to people who have principles they won't compromise. The touch was light, barely there, but Meredith felt her thoughts scatter like startled birds. The questions she'd prepared, the professional distance she'd sworn to maintain, all of it dissolved under the weight of his attention. "Stop," she whispered. "Stop what?" But he withdrew his hand. "You know what? You do this deliberately." "Do what deliberately?" "Touch me. Stand too close. Say things designed to make me forget why I'm here." Her voice strengthened with frustration. "It's manipulation. It's interest," Adrian corrected softly. "There's a difference. Manipulation requires dishonesty. I'm being completely honest." He leaned back, giving her space. "I find you fascinating. I enjoy watching your mind work. And yes, I notice that you can't think clearly when I touch you. But I'm not using that against you, Meredith. I'm just acknowledging that there's something between us. There can't be something between us. I'm investigating you. You're investigating my business practices. That has nothing to do with whether we're attracted to each other. It has everything to do with it." Meredith grabbed her wine glass, needing something to do with her hands. "I can't be objective if we're attracted to each other? Involved." "We're not involved," Adrian pointed out. "We're having dinner, talking, getting to know each other. There's nothing unethical about that. Except there was. Everything about this felt like standing on the edge of something dangerous." Meredith had built her career on clear boundaries, professional distance, and never ever getting emotionally entangled with her subjects. "Tell me about the Novak Industries acquisition," she said, deliberately steering back to business. "That's where the largest discrepancies occur." Adrian studied her for a moment, then nodded, accepting the retreat. Novak was different. They weren't just struggling, they were being deliberately sabotaged. Over dinner, perfect pasta that Meredith barely tasted. Adrian explained how he'd discovered that Novak's primary competitor had been bribing government officials to deny the company necessary permits. The acquisition had been a rescue, not a raid, but proving the bribery meant exposing corruption that went all the way to the Serbian parliament. "You have proof?" Meredith asked. "I have enough to make some very powerful people very nervous." Adrian's expression darkened. "Which is why this investigation worries me." "Worries you how?" "Richard Vance has business connections in Belgrade. So does Thomas Ashford." He met her eyes. "I don't think they hired you to find evidence of fraud, Meredith. I think they hired you to find leverage." The implication settled over her like cold water. "You think they want to force you out?" "I think they want control. And if they can prove I've been acting against shareholder interests, even legally, they have grounds to challenge my authority." Adrian's jaw tightened, which would stop the anti-corruption investigation and allow them to restructure the Novak deal however they want. Meredith's mind raced through possibilities. If Adrian was telling the truth and everything she'd found suggested he was, then she wasn't investigating corporate fraud. She was being used as a weapon in a power struggle. "Why not just tell the board about the corruption?" she asked. "Because I don't have all the evidence yet, and because going public before I'm ready would get people killed." The words were quiet, serious. "This isn't just business, Meredith. There are factory workers in Serbia who've been cooperating with my investigation. If Vance and Ashford take control and shut it down, those people become loose ends." The restaurant suddenly felt too small, too warm. Meredith looked at her phone, still recording on the table, at Adrian's face illuminated by candlelight, at the carefully constructed reality she'd built around this investigation, crumbling into something far more complex. "I need to verify all of this," she said finally. "I'll give you everything. Financial records, correspondence with the Serbian investigators, witness statements, all of it." Adrian's hand found hers on the table, his fingers warm and solid. "But I need you to promise me something." "What?" "That you'll find the truth, regardless of who hired you to look." His thumb traced across her knuckles, and Meredith felt her analytical mind threaten to shut down entirely. "That you won't let Richard Vance turn you into a weapon against people who are trying to do the right thing." She should pull her hand away, should remind him about professional boundaries, should focus on the facts, not the feelings. Instead, she turned her hand over, letting their palms meet. "I can't think when you touch me," she admitted quietly. Adrian's smile was slow, warm. "Good, don't. That's not..." She took a breath. "I need to think clearly. This investigation is complicated enough without attraction complicating it further?" He didn't release her hand. Too late. Meredith. It's already complicated. He was right. Everything about this was complicated. The investigation, the board politics, the corruption allegations, and most dangerously, the way her pulse jumped when he looked at her like she was the most fascinating puzzle he'd ever encountered. I need access to the Serbian investigation files, she said, trying to regain professional footing. All of them. Tomorrow morning. I'll have Caroline prepare everything. Adrian's fingers tightened briefly on hers before letting go. But tonight, can we just be two people having dinner? We're not just two people. No, he agreed. But we could pretend for a few hours. Meredith looked at him, really looked at him, past the wealth and the power and the devastating confidence, at the man who'd chosen community over profits, who was risking his company to expose corruption, who touched her like she was precious, and challenged her like she was an equal. One night, she said. Then tomorrow, we go back to being investigator and subject. Adrian's smile was answer enough. They talked for 2 more hours, not about business or investigations or corporate intrigue, but about everything else. His childhood in Athens before his family moved to Chicago, her parents' restaurant in San Francisco's Chinatown, where she'd learned that people always revealed themselves through what they chose to hide. His sister in Boston who taught literature and thought he worked too hard. Her college roommate who'd become a civil rights attorney and regularly reminded Meredith that corporate investigation was morally gray at best. By the time they left the restaurant, Meredith had learned that Adrian spoke 4 languages, played piano badly, and had a particular fondness for old film noir because everyone's motives are so deliciously transparent. Even the femme fatales? She asked as they stood on the sidewalk outside. Especially the femme fatales. He looked down at her, and the streetlight caught silver in his dark hair. They always think they're in control right up until they realize they've fallen for the detective. I'm not a femme fatale. No. Adrian reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear with devastating gentleness. You're something more dangerous. You're real. Meredith's breath caught. She should step back. Should thank him for dinner and call a car and go back to her hotel to review everything he'd told her with proper analytical distance. Instead, she leaned into his touch, just slightly, and watched something shift in his eyes. This is a terrible idea, she whispered. The worst, he agreed. Neither of them moved away. I should go, Meredith said. You should. But Adrian's hand curved against her cheek, his thumb brushing her jawline. Tell me to stop. She couldn't. The words wouldn't form. Because despite every professional instinct, every carefully maintained boundary, every reason this was absolutely the wrong thing to do, she didn't want him to stop. Meredith. Her name on his lips sounded like a question and an answer. What are you thinking? That I can't think, she admitted. That you make everything complicated and I don't know how to. He kissed her. It was soft, questioning, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Meredith rose on her toes instead, her hands finding his shoulders, and kissed him back with all the intensity she'd been restraining since the moment he'd first touched her spine and made her forget her own name. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. Tomorrow, he said quietly, we'll go back to being professional. Tonight let me take you home. Home? Your hotel. A slight smile. I'm not presuming anything beyond making sure you get there safely. Meredith nodded, not trusting her voice. She'd spent 12 years building a reputation on never compromising her objectivity, never getting emotionally involved, never letting attraction cloud her judgment. One kiss had just shattered every single rule, and the most terrifying part was how little she cared. Chapter 5. The Choice. Meredith didn't sleep. She lay in her hotel bed, watching city lights play across the ceiling, replaying every moment of dinner, analyzing every word Adrian had said, trying desperately to restore the analytical framework that had always been her greatest strength. It refused to return. At 4 a.m., she gave up and opened her laptop. The files Caroline had sent at midnight were comprehensive hundreds of pages of documentation about the Serbian investigation. Names, dates, financial transfers, testimony from factory workers who'd witnessed bribery firsthand. It was exactly what Adrian had promised. Evidence of corruption so extensive it would take months to fully unravel. And woven throughout the files were traces of something else. Adrian's personal investment in protecting the people who'd trusted him with the truth. Notes in his own handwriting about ensuring witness safety. emails to legal teams about securing asylum for workers who'd testified, financial arrangements to support families whose breadwinners had been threatened. This wasn't a billionaire protecting his investment. This was someone who'd made promises and refused to break them, regardless of the cost. Meredith closed her laptop and stared at the ceiling again. Her phone buzzed. A text from Adrian at 4:30 in the morning. "Can't sleep either?" She hesitated, then replied, "Reviewing files. Liar. You're overthinking what happened tonight. Maybe both." A pause then. "It was just a kiss, Meredith. Nothing with you is just anything." Another longer pause. Then her phone rang. She should let it go to voicemail. Should maintain the professional distance she'd promised herself at midnight. She answered on the second ring. "You're gonna drive yourself crazy," Adrian said without preamble. His voice was rough with exhaustion and something else concern. "I can practically hear you analyzing from here." "Where is here?" "My apartment. 47th floor of the building you're investigating me from. Poetic, isn't it?" Despite everything, Meredith smiled. Ironic, at least. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "For what?" "For complicating your investigation. For kissing you when I knew it would make everything harder. A breath. For not being sorry enough to wish I hadn't done it." Meredith's chest tightened. "Adrian, you don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know that whatever you decide about the investigation, about us, about any of this, I'll respect it." He paused. "Even if I don't like it. Why are you making this so difficult?" "Because easy things aren't worth having." His voice softened. "And you, Meredith Chen, are worth every complication." She closed her eyes against the wave of emotion. "I need to finish this investigation properly, without me distracting you. I know." He sounded resigned. "Caroline will continue providing access to files. I'll stay out of your way. You'll have the space you need to do your job." It was exactly what she should want. Professional distance, clear boundaries, the ability to complete her analysis without emotional interference. So why did it feel like loss? "Thank you," she managed. "Meredith?" He waited until she acknowledged him with a small sound. "When this is over, when you've submitted your report and completed your investigation, ask me to dinner. Again, I promise to be much less of a gentleman about it." He hung up before she could respond, leaving her alone with her racing heart and the uncomfortable realization that she wanted nothing more than to take him up on that promise. The next 3 days were torture. Adrian kept his word. Meredith didn't see him once. Caroline provided files, access, and professional courtesy, but never mentioned her boss. The executive workspace remained at Meredith's disposal, but Adrian's presence was conspicuously absent. She should have been grateful for the space. Instead, she found herself listening for his voice in the hallways, looking up every time someone walked past her office, checking her phone for texts that didn't come, and through it all, she worked. The Serbian investigation was even more extensive than she'd initially realized. Adrian had been building a case against 12 government officials and 5 corporate executives for nearly 18 months. The evidence was meticulous, damning, and incredibly dangerous. If this information fell into the wrong hands, say, Richard Vance and his Belgrade connections, people would die. Factory workers who'd testified would lose their protection. The anti-corruption investigation would collapse, and Thorne Industries would be restructured exactly how Vance wanted it. Maximum profits, minimum ethics. On the 4th day, Meredith requested a meeting with the 3 board members who'd hired her. They gathered in a conference room at Castellan Analytics' Chicago office, neutral territory. Richard Vance arrived first, all-practice charm and expensive cologne. Thomas Ashford came next, checking his phone constantly. Patricia Kensington was last, impeccably dressed and radiating the kind of cold intelligence that had made her a billionaire before 40. "Miss Chen," Vance smiled with too many teeth. "I trust you have findings to share?" Meredith opened her tablet, pulling up the preliminary report she'd spent the past 2 days. "Crafting. I do. Though I suspect they're not what you expected." Patricia leaned forward. Meaning I found no evidence of fraud, embezzlement, or financial impropriety." Meredith kept her voice level, professional. "The discrepancies in European holdings are the result of profit reinvestment, which falls within Mr. Thorne's operational discretion as CEO." Vance's smile tightened. "Our contract with Castellan was quite clear. We need evidence of mismanagement." "What you need," Meredith corrected carefully, "is leverage. Unfortunately for you, I don't manufacture evidence." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Thomas Ashford set down his phone. That's a serious accusation, Miss Chen. Is it? She pulled up another file. Because I've spent the past week investigating not just Mr. Thorne's business practices, but the business practices of everyone involved in this situation, including the three of you. She watched their faces carefully. Vance went very still. Ashford's jaw tightened. Only Patricia maintained her composure, though something flickered behind her eyes. Thomas, you have a controlling interest in Balkan's manufacturing group. One of the companies Adrian discovered was bribing Serbian officials. Meredith pulled up documentation. Richard, your cousin sits on the Belgrade Parliament and has been very vocal about blocking anti-corruption investigations. And Patricia. She looked at the other woman. You're actually clean, which is why I'm confused about your involvement. Patricia's laugh was sharp, humorless. You're thorough. I'll give you that. It's my job. Meredith closed her tablet. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to submit a report to Castellan stating I found no actionable evidence of wrongdoing by Adrian Thorne. I'm going to recommend they close this investigation and return your retainer. We had a contract, Vance started, which I'm fulfilling. You hired me to investigate. I investigated. I found nothing illegal. Meredith stood. What you do with that information is your business. But if you're thinking about using my work to manufacture leverage against Mr. Thorne, I should mention that I've also documented very interesting connections between your business interests and the corruption Adrian is investigating. Are you threatening us? Ashford's voice was ice. I'm informing you. Meredith gathered her things. Adrian Thorne has spent 18 months building a case that could topple a significant corruption network. He's protecting witnesses, cooperating with international investigators, and putting his own company at risk to do the right thing. If you interfere with that investigation, I'll make sure every piece of evidence I've gathered about your involvement reaches the appropriate authorities. Vance stood, his charm completely evaporated. You're making a very dangerous mistake. I'm doing my job. Meredith met his eyes without flinching. The one where I find the truth, not the one where I provide weapons for corporate warfare. She walked out before they could respond, her heart hammering but her hands steady. In the elevator down to the lobby, her phone rang. Unknown number. Meredith Chen. That was either very brave or very stupid. Patricia Kensington's voice was contemplative. I haven't decided which. Why did you hire me? Meredith asked directly. You're not corrupt like the others. What's your angle? A long pause. I wanted to know if Adrian was as idealistic as he seemed, or if it was all performance. Men with that much money are rarely genuine. Another pause. Thank you for answering that question. You're welcome? One more thing. Patricia's voice hardened. Richard Vance doesn't make empty threats. Watch your back, Miss Chen. And tell Adrian to watch his. The line went dead. Meredith stood in the lobby of Castellan Analytics building, letting the weight of what she'd just done settle over her. She'd ended her investigation, protected Adrian's anti-corruption work, made herself a target, and completely destroyed any remaining professional objectivity she might have claimed. Her phone buzzed with a text from Adrian. Caroline said you left the building an hour ago. Everything okay? She stared at the message. She could tell him everything was fine. Submit her report, collect her fee, and walk away. That would be the smart choice. The safe choice. The choice that would let her sleep at night. Meredith typed, "Meet me at my hotel. We need to talk." His response was immediate. On my way. Chapter 6. Truth and Consequences. Adrian arrived 20 minutes later, still in a suit from whatever meeting he'd abandoned, his face a study in controlled concern. Meredith opened her hotel room door and saw him assess her in one sweeping glance, checking for injuries, threats, problems he could solve with money or influence. What happened? He asked, stepping inside. She closed the door and leaned against it. I just burned a bridge with 3 very powerful board members and possibly endangered my career. His expression shifted from concern to something more complex. What did you do? My job. The one where I find the truth instead of ammunition. Meredith walked to the window, putting distance between them because she needed to think clearly, and that was impossible when he stood too close. I told Vance, Ashford, and Kensington that I found no evidence of fraud. I told them I know about their connections to the Serbian corruption, and I told them, if they interfere with your investigation, I'll make sure the appropriate authorities get every piece of evidence I've gathered. Silence. She turned to find Adrian staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. You defended me? He said quietly. I defended the truth. There's a difference. Is there? He moved toward her, and Meredith's pulse kicked. Because it sounds like you just made yourself a target to protect my investigation. I made myself a target because Richard Vance hired me to manufacture evidence and I refused. She held her ground even as he approached. That's not about you, Adrian. That's about me doing my job with integrity. Your job was to investigate me, to find irregularities and report them. He stopped close enough that she could see silver flecks in his gray eyes. Instead, you investigated everyone, found the real corruption, and put yourself at risk to expose it. That's not just integrity, Meredith. That's heroism. It's not, it is. His hand came up to cup her face, and Meredith felt her thoughts begin to scatter. And you did it knowing exactly what it would cost you. She should step back, should maintain the professional distance she'd promised herself. But his thumb was tracing her cheekbone, and her carefully constructed defenses were crumbling like sand. Patricia warned me, she said, her voice unsteady. Vance doesn't make empty threats. He's dangerous, Adrian. I know. His other hand found her waist. Which is why you're going to let me help you. I don't need. You need security, legal protection, resources that can match what Vance and Ashford can bring to bear. His voice was firm, certain, and you need someone who understands exactly what you've risked and won't let you face it alone. Meredith's hands had somehow found their way to his chest, fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt. This is why I couldn't think clearly. You make everything feel urgent and important and real? Adrian's forehead touched hers. Because it is real, Meredith. What's between us, what you've done, the danger you're in, all of it is real. I can't. Her breath hitched. I can't be objective about you anymore. I can't separate the investigation from this? He kissed her, and unlike the tentative kiss outside the restaurant, this one was fierce, possessive, filled with days of restraint breaking loose. Meredith kissed him back with equal intensity, her analytical mind surrendering entirely to sensation. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian's hands framed her face. The investigation is over, he said. You found the truth. You're filing your report. There's nothing left to be objective about. There's us, Meredith whispered. I don't know how to do this. How to be with someone I investigated. How to trust that this is real and not just what? Attraction? Chemistry? His smile was slight, warm. Meredith, I've been falling for you since you walked into my office and refused to be intimidated. The investigation, the dinner, the kiss, those were all just excuses to spend time with someone who challenges me, fascinates me, and sees past the money to who I actually am. You don't fall for people in a week. I don't. He kissed her forehead. Except apparently I do. Meredith closed her eyes, letting herself lean into him, feeling the solid warmth of his chest against her cheek. This was insane. She'd known him for less than a week. She'd been hired to investigate him. Everything about this was complicated and potentially disastrous, and yet it felt more right than anything she'd experienced in years. I'm scared, she admitted quietly. Of me? Of how much I want this. Want you. She pulled back to look at him. My whole career is built on maintaining distance, on never getting emotionally involved, and you've made me break every single rule. Good. His smile widened. Because I've spent 15 years building a company and learning to read people and navigate corporate politics, and you're the first person who's made me forget all of it because I was too busy trying to figure out how to make you smile. Despite everything, the danger, the uncertainty, the professional chaos, Meredith smiled. There it is, Adrian murmured, and kissed her again. This time, they didn't pull apart quickly. This time, Meredith let herself sink into the kiss, into the warmth of his arms, into the terrifying and exhilarating reality that she was falling for someone who made her forget to think and made her feel everything. When they finally separated, Adrian's phone was buzzing insistently. He glanced at it and frowned. Caroline, I need to take this. Meredith nodded, using the moment to catch her breath and try to restore some semblance of rational thought. She heard Adrian's voice from across the room, tense and sharp. When? How bad? No, don't call the police yet. I'll handle it. He hung up and turned to her, his expression grim. We have a problem. What kind of problem? Someone broke into my office. They didn't take anything, just went through files, my computer, Everything related to the Serbian investigation. His jaw tightened. Caroline interrupted them before they could copy anything, but they got away. Meredith's blood went cold. Vance. It has to be. That would be my guess. Adrian pulled out his phone again. I'm calling my head of security. And then I'm calling you a lawyer. Adrian, I can... No. His voice was firm but not unkind. You've already done enough. You've put yourself at risk to protect people you don't even know. Let me help you now. Please. The please undid her. Meredith nodded. Over the next hour, Adrian made a series of calls that revealed just how much power and resources he actually had. Security consultants, corporate lawyers, a friend who worked for the FBI's International Corruption Unit. By the time he finished, Meredith had a protection detail, legal representation, and apparently a safe house if things escalated. This is excessive, she said, as he finally set down his phone. This is necessary. Adrian sat beside her on the hotel room couch. Vance isn't just angry that you didn't give him what he wanted. He's scared that you know enough to expose his connections to the Serbian corruption. Scared people do dangerous things. I've dealt with dangerous people before. Not like this. His hand found hers. Not people with Vance's resources and connections. Promise me you'll take this seriously. Meredith wanted to argue, to insist she could handle herself. But the fear in Adrian's eyes, genuine, deep fear for her safety, made her reconsider. I promise, she said. He pulled her close, and they sat in silence for a long moment. Outside the window, Chicago glittered in the darkness, beautiful and indifferent to the small dramas of the people within it. I need to ask you something, Adrian said finally, and I need you to be honest. Okay? Do you regret it? Taking this investigation? Meeting me? Any of it? Meredith considered the question carefully. A week ago, her life had been orderly, predictable, safe. She'd known exactly who she was and what she wanted. Now everything was chaos, her investigation compromised, her career potentially damaged, her carefully maintained emotional walls demolished. No, she said, and meant it. I don't regret any of it. Adrian's arms tightened around her. Good, because I have a feeling things are going to get worse before they get better. He was right. But sitting there in his arms, feeling his heartbeat steady against her back, Meredith discovered she was willing to face whatever came next, as long as she didn't have to face it alone. Chapter 7. Under Pressure. The call came at 3 a.m. Meredith jerked awake to her phone buzzing on the nightstand, Adrian's arm heavy and warm across her waist. He'd stayed after the security consultations, and she'd been too exhausted and too unwilling to let him leave to send him home. Chen, she answered, her voice rough with sleep. Miss Chen, this is Detective Sarah Morrison with CPD. We need you to come down to the station. Meredith sat up, instantly alert. Beside her, Adrian stirred. What's this about? Richard Vance has filed a complaint alleging corporate espionage, breach of contract, and theft of proprietary information. The detective's voice was carefully neutral. We'd like to ask you some questions. I'll be there in an hour, with my lawyer. After she hung up, Adrian was already on his phone, calling the attorney he'd hired for her the previous evening. Meredith listened to him explain the situation with calm efficiency, while she tried to process what was happening. Vance was attacking, fast and hard, using the legal system as a weapon. Meredith. Adrian ended his call and turned to her. David Rothstein will meet you at the station. Don't say anything without him present. I know how this works. I know you do. He cupped her face gently. But I also know you have a tendency to trust that truth will win. Sometimes it doesn't. Not without a fight. She wanted to argue, but he was right. She'd spent her career believing that evidence and facts were enough. But this wasn't about truth, this was about power. And Vance had plenty of it. 2 hours later, Meredith sat in an interrogation room at the Chicago Police Department's Central District, David Rothstein beside her, a sharp-eyed attorney in his 50s who'd made his reputation defending whistleblowers and corporate investigators. Detective Morrison was professional but thorough. She asked about Meredith's investigation, her contract with the board members, her access to Thorne Industries files. Every question was designed to establish whether Meredith had exceeded her authority or taken information she wasn't entitled to. My client was hired to conduct a financial investigation, Rothstein interjected smoothly. She was given full access by both the board members who hired her and by Mr. Thorne himself. Everything she reviewed was within the scope of her contract. Mr. Vance claims Miss Chen threatened him with evidence she obtained illegally, Morrison said, consulting her notes. He says she's attempting to extort board members. Meredith's hands clenched under the table. Before Rothstein could respond, she spoke. I informed Mr. Vance that I had documented connections between his business interests and foreign corruption. I didn't threaten him, I told him the truth. There's a difference. Meredith, Rothstein warned quietly, but Morrison's expression had shifted not much, but enough. You have evidence of corruption? I have documentation that raises significant questions about business relationships between board members and entities currently under investigation by Serbian authorities. Meredith held the detective's gaze, which I would be happy to share with the appropriate law enforcement agencies. Morrison leaned back, studying her. Mr. Vance claims you're making this up to cover your own illegal activities. Then he shouldn't mind if you verify it. Meredith pulled out her phone, pulling up a document. This is a transfer record showing payment from a Vance subsidiary to a Serbian company that's been identified as a bribery intermediary. I can provide 24 more examples. Rothstein put a hand on her arm. My client is willing to cooperate fully with any legitimate investigation, but the allegations against her are clearly retaliatory. Mr. Vance is attempting to use the legal system to silence someone who discovered his own misconduct. The interview continued for another hour, but the tone had shifted. By the time Meredith and Rothstein left the station, she had the distinct impression that Detective Morrison was more interested in investigating Vance than prosecuting her. You took a risk in there, Rothstein said as they stood on the station steps in the early morning light, offering evidence without a cooperation agreement. I'm tired of playing games, Meredith said. Vance wants to make this a legal battle? Fine. Let's bring everything into the light and see who walks away clean. Rothstein smiled slightly. Adrian said you were principled to the point of recklessness. I see what he means. Is that a compliment? From him? Definitely. Adrian was waiting in a car across the street, and the relief on his face when he saw her was almost painful in its intensity. She slid into the back seat beside him, and his arms came around her immediately. Are you okay? He asked into her hair. I'm fine. Morrison is smart. She saw through Vance's accusations pretty quickly. Meredith pulled back to look at him. But this is just the beginning. He's not going to stop. Neither are we. Adrian's voice was steel beneath the concern. I've already reached out to the FBI contact I mentioned. They're very interested in your documentation about the Serbian connections. Adrian, if we do this, if we really go after Vance and the others, it's going to get ugly. It's already ugly. His hands framed her face. But we have something they don't. What's that? The truth. And each other. He kissed her forehead. I know that sounds idealistic, but I've built a career on the premise that doing the right thing eventually wins. I'm not stopping now. Meredith leaned into him, drawing strength from his certainty. She'd spent 12 years learning to be cynical, to expect the worst from people, to trust only what she could prove. Adrian was teaching her something different, that sometimes principle was more powerful than pragmatism. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was everything she hadn't known she wanted. Take me to your office, she said. If we're doing this, we need to organize every piece of evidence into something the FBI can actually use. Adrian's smile was fierce, proud. That's my girl. The endearment should have bothered her possessive, presumptuous. Instead, it made her feel anchored, claimed in the best possible way. They spent the next 12 hours at Thorne Industries, building a comprehensive case. Caroline helped, along with Adrian's legal team and 2 forensic accountants who asked questions Meredith hadn't even considered. By evening, they had a document that tracked money, relationships, and corruption across 3 countries and half a dozen companies. It was damning. It was thorough. It was exactly the kind of evidence that could topple the network Vance had spent years building. We need to be prepared for retaliation, one of the lawyers warned. When this goes to the FBI, Vance will know it came from you. Both of you. Let him know, Adrian said calmly. I'm done being afraid of men who use money as a weapon. Meredith looked at him, this brilliant, idealistic, complicated man who'd turned her world upside down in a week, and felt something shift in her chest. Not fear, not uncertainty, certainty. I'm in, she said. Whatever comes next, I'm in. Adrian's hand found hers under the conference table, his fingers threading through hers with the ease of long-time intimacy. Whatever comes next, he agreed. Chapter 8. Breaking Point. The FBI moved faster than Meredith expected. Within 48 hours of receiving their evidence package, 2 agents arrived at Thorne Industries to conduct formal interviews. Within a week, search warrants had been executed at offices connected to Vance, Ashford, and 3 Serbian companies. And within 2 weeks, Meredith's life had become an unrecognizable chaos of legal proceedings, media attention, and security concerns. She'd moved into Adrian's apartment after the 3rd threatening message appeared under her hotel room door. He'd insisted, and she'd been too exhausted to argue. The penthouse was beautiful, all windows and clean lines and a view of the city that took her breath away, but it was also a cage. Security escorts, restricted movements, constant vigilance. "I hate this," she said one evening, standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows watching the city lights blur in the rain. "I hate feeling trapped." Adrian came up behind her, his arms circling her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "I know." "Do you? You've had security your whole adult life. You're used to people managing your movements, controlling your access." She leaned back against him. "I'm used to being invisible. I'm used to observing without being observed. You were never invisible, Meredith. You just thought you were." His lips brushed her temple. "But I understand. This isn't the life you chose." She turned in his arms to face him. "I chose to do the right thing. This is the consequence. You shouldn't have to pay this price for integrity. Neither should you." She touched his face, tracing the lines of stress that had appeared over the past 2 weeks. "The board is calling for your resignation. Half your investors are threatening to pull out. Your company's stock has dropped 15%. And I'd do it all again." He captured her hand, kissing her palm. "Because some things matter more than stock prices." "Like what?" "Like justice. Like protecting people who trusted me with the truth. Like you." His eyes met hers, intense and certain. "I've spent 15 years building an empire, Meredith. It never meant as much to me as you do." The words should have terrified her. They'd known each other less than a month. This was too fast, too intense, too much. Instead, she felt only relief that she wasn't alone in the velocity of whatever this was between them. "I think I'm falling in love with you," she whispered. "And it scares me more than anything Vance could do." Adrian's smile was slow, warm. "Good. Love should be terrifying. Otherwise, it's not worth having." He kissed her then, and Meredith let herself forget about the investigation, the threats, the chaos surrounding them. Let herself focus only on the way he held her, like she was precious, like she was chosen, like she was home. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Adrian pressed his forehead to hers. "Marry me," he said. Meredith froze. "What?" "Marry me." He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. "I know it's fast. I know it's probably crazy. But I've spent my whole life making calculated decisions, and this is the first time I want to do something completely impulsive. Adrian, I'm not asking you to say yes right now. I'm just asking you to consider it." His hands framed her face. "Because I know what I want, Meredith. I want you. In my life, in my home, in every decision I make from here forward. And I don't want to wait years to make it official." Her heart was hammering so hard she could barely breathe. "This is insane." "Completely." He smiled. "Is that a no?" She should say no. Should point out that they'd met during an investigation, that their relationship was built on intensity and danger rather than normal courtship. Should remind him that she didn't believe in impulsive decisions. "Ask me again when this is over," she said instead. "When we're not living under security protection and fighting legal battles. When we can actually have a normal conversation without lawyers present. Promise me you'll consider it." "I promise." She kissed him softly. "But Adrian, I think my answer is going to be yes." His smile could have lit the city. The breaking point came 3 days later. Meredith was working in Adrian's home office. She'd been helping his legal team organize evidence for the grand jury proceedings when Caroline called. "Meredith, you need to get to the hospital. Adrian's been in an accident." The world tilted. "What kind of accident?" "Car collision. He's alive, but..." Caroline's voice cracked slightly. "They're saying someone forced him off the road." Meredith was moving before she consciously decided to, grabbing her coat, her bag, her phone. Adrian's security team tried to stop her. Protocol required planning, routes, protection, but she bulldozed past them. "Take me to the hospital now or I'm calling a cab." They took her. Northwestern Memorial's ER was chaos. Doctors, nurses, police officers asking questions she couldn't answer. Finally, a surgeon found her in the waiting room. "Mr. Thorne has a concussion, 3 broken ribs and a fractured wrist. He's stable, but we're keeping him for observation." The surgeon paused. He was lucky. The car that hit him was significantly larger. If he'd been going any faster, he didn't need to finish. Meredith understood perfectly. They let her see him 20 minutes later. Adrian was propped up in a hospital bed, looking pale and battered but achingly alive. His eyes found hers the moment she entered, and something in his expression broke. "Meredith." She crossed to him in 3 strides, careful not to jar his injuries, and pressed her face against his shoulder. "You scared me. I scared myself." His good hand came up to stroke her hair. "It was deliberate. The driver aimed for me." "I know." She pulled back to look at him. "The police are outside. They want a statement." "In a minute." Adrian's fingers traced her face like he was memorizing it. "First, I need to tell you something." "What?" "I asked you to marry me 3 days ago. You said to ask again when this was over." His smile was slight, pained. "I'm not waiting." "Meredith Chen, will you marry me?" She stared at him, bruised, bandaged, impossibly stubborn, and felt every carefully constructed wall she'd ever built crumble completely. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." Adrian's smile was worth every risk, every complication, every terrifying moment of uncertainty. "Good," he said, pulling her down for a careful kiss. "Because I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you." It was a promise and a claim, and Meredith surrendered to both. Chapter 9. The Trial. The grand jury indictment came down 6 weeks later. Richard Vance, Thomas Ashford, and 7 others were charged with international corruption, money laundering, and conspiracy. The evidence Meredith and Adrian had gathered formed the backbone of the prosecution's case. Patricia Kensington, true to form, had disappeared, gone to ground somewhere in Switzerland, according to rumors. But she'd sent Meredith a message through an encrypted email. "You were right to trust him. I was right to trust you." The trial was set for early fall. Meredith would testify. So would Adrian. So would factory workers from Serbia who'd risked everything to tell the truth. But first, there was a different kind of reckoning. The Thorne Industries board called an emergency meeting to address Adrian's leadership. The remaining board members, minus the 3 under indictment, wanted answers about why their CEO had prioritized fighting corruption over maximizing profits. Adrian asked Meredith to attend. "You don't have to," he said the night before the meeting. They were in his apartment, their apartment now, though her things still occupied only 1 closet and half a dresser. "This could get ugly. I've seen ugly before." She sat beside him on the couch, tucking her feet under her. "Besides, I'm not letting you face them alone." His arm came around her shoulders, pulling her close. "My fierce defender." "Your fiancé," she corrected. They'd announced the engagement quietly, to family only. Her parents had been skeptical until they met Adrian and saw the way he looked at their daughter. His sister had declared it the most romantic thing she'd ever heard, then immediately started planning a wedding. "My everything," Adrian murmured against her hair. The board meeting was exactly as ugly as promised. 8 members remained after the indictments. 4 were Adrian's allies, genuinely interested in building a company that did more than extract profit. 4 were furious that their stock value had dropped and their reputations had been tarnished by association. "You've endangered this company's future," one of the hostile members, Gerald Hastings, declared. "You've prioritized your personal crusade over shareholder value." "I prioritized ethics over exploitation," Adrian corrected calmly. "There's a difference. Tell that to our investors. Tell that to the pension funds that have lost millions because you decided to play hero." Hastings's face was red. "You should resign before you do more damage." "No." Adrian's voice was steel. "I built this company from nothing. I took calculated risks, made hard decisions, and created something sustainable. What I won't do is compromise the integrity of that work to satisfy people who see only quarterly reports." "Then we'll vote you out," another board member said. "James Wellington. Old money and older ideas. We have the authority." "You do," Adrian agreed. "But before you vote, I'd like Miss Chen to present some findings." All eyes turned to Meredith. She stood, tablet in hand, and walked to the head of the conference table with the confidence of someone who'd presented to hostile audiences before. "Over the past 2 months, I've conducted a comprehensive analysis of Thorn Industries' performance across all holdings, she began. What I found was fascinating. She pulled up a series of graphs on the room's main screen. The European holdings that Mr. Thorn invested in, the ones you claim are dragging down shareholder value, have increased productivity by an average of 37%. Employee retention is up 62%. Innovation metrics have doubled. Yes, profit margins are slightly lower than they could be, but long-term sustainability and growth potential are significantly higher than comparable companies that prioritized short-term extraction. She switched to another graph. More importantly, every company Thorn Industries has acquired under Adrian's leadership has increased in actual value by an average of 43% within 2 years. That's not just good business, that's exceptional business. Gerald Hastings leaned forward. Those numbers are irrelevant if our stock price continues to fall. Your stock price is falling because you're under investigation and 3 board members have been indicted, Meredith said, bluntly. Not because Adrian prioritized ethical practices. In fact, preliminary polling shows that 73% of consumers view Thorn Industries more favorably since the corruption investigation became public. She let that sink in before continuing. You have a choice. You can remove Adrian and install someone who'll maximize short-term profits through exploitation. Your stock might recover faster. You'll satisfy certain investors. She met each board member's eyes in turn. Or you can keep a CEO who's proven that ethical business practices and profitability aren't mutually exclusive. Someone who's built genuine value rather than extracting it. Someone who's turned this company into something more than just another corporation stripping resources and abandoning communities. She closed her tablet. The question isn't whether Adrian has damaged this company. The question is whether you have the vision to see what he's actually built. Silence filled the room. Finally, one of Adrian's allies, Margaret Chen, no relation to Meredith, spoke up. I move that we table the resignation discussion and instead focus on strategic planning for the next fiscal year. We need to rebuild investor confidence, but not by abandoning the principles that actually make this company valuable. Seconded, another ally said immediately. The vote was close 5-3 in Adrian's favor, with 1 abstention. Not a ringing endorsement, but enough. As the board members filed out, Gerald Hastings stopped beside Meredith. That was quite a performance, he said coldly. That was quite a lot of research and data analysis, she corrected. If you'd like to review my methodology, I'd be happy to share it. He stalked off without responding. Adrian waited until the room cleared before pulling her into his arms. Thank you, he said quietly. I didn't do it for you. I did it because it was true. She pulled back to look at him. Although I might have enjoyed defending you more than is strictly professional. His laugh was warm, relieved. My fierce, brilliant, thoroughly unprofessional fiancé. Former investigator, she corrected. I officially resigned from Castellan Analytics this morning. Adrian went very still. You did? I did. Turns out, being romantically involved with a former subject creates irreconcilable conflicts of interest. She smiled slightly. Also, I got a much better offer. What kind of offer? The kind where I use my skills to identify ethically sound investment opportunities for a certain billionaire who insists on doing business the hard way. She traced the line of his jaw. Apparently, there's a market for corporate intelligence that actually serves the greater good. Who knew? Adrian's smile was slow, proud. You're going to work for me? With you. There's a difference. She kissed him softly. I'm done investigating you, Adrian Thorn. Now I get to help you build something actually worth protecting. I love you, he said, and the words were simple, certain, absolute. I love you too. Meredith pressed her forehead to his. Even though you're terrible for my blood pressure and my professional reputation. Especially because of that, he agreed. They stood there in the empty conference room, holding each other, and Meredith thought about the person she'd been a few months ago. So certain of her path, so confident in her emotional distance, so sure that thinking clearly was more important than feeling deeply. Adrian had demolished every one of those certainties, and she'd never been more grateful for anything in her life. Chapter 10. Vows and Verdicts. The trial began in September, just as Chicago's summer heat broke into cooler autumn air. Meredith testified for 3 days. She walked the jury through financial records, explained complex corporate structures, and made the connection between money trails and corruption so clear that even the defense attorneys looked uncomfortable. Adrian testified for 2 days, focusing on the Serbian investigation and the threats against factory workers. His calm, detailed testimony painted a picture of systematic corruption that the prosecution used to devastating effect. But the most powerful testimony came from a woman named Zofia, the textile worker Adrian had mentioned during their first dinner together. She told the jury about bribes, threats, and the fear that had permeated her community until Adrian Thorne had promised protection and actually delivered it. The jury deliberated for 6 hours, guilty on all counts. Richard Vance was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Thomas Ashford got 10. The others received various sentences ranging from probation to 7 years. It was over. Or rather, that chapter was over. Meredith and Adrian were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the Chicago Botanic Garden, surrounded by family and a handful of close friends. Caroline was there, beaming with maternal pride. David Rothstein attended with his wife. Even Detective Morrison showed up, telling Meredith privately that she'd been inspired to transfer to the Financial Crimes Unit. "Because of you," Morrison said, "you proved that integrity actually matters." Meredith's parents flew in from San Francisco, and her father pulled Adrian aside for a conversation that left them both smiling. Adrian's sister gave a toast that made everyone laugh and cry in equal measure. But the moment Meredith would remember forever came when she stood across from Adrian, his hands holding hers, and listened to him speak vows he'd written himself. "I promise to challenge you when you're too logical," he said, his voice steady but his eyes bright. "To remind you that thinking clearly isn't always more important than feeling deeply. To make you forget your own name occasionally, just to prove I still can." The guests laughed softly. "I promise to build a life with you that's worth protecting," he continued, more serious now. "To never ask you to compromise your principles, even when it's inconvenient. To always choose you, even when the choice is difficult," he smiled. "And I promise to love you with the same intensity that made you say, 'I can't think when you touch me,' because that moment when your brilliant mind surrendered to your beautiful heart was when I knew you were the person I wanted to spend my life with." Meredith's own vows were shorter, simpler, but no less true. "I promise to trust you," she said, her voice catching slightly. "Even when my instincts tell me to maintain distance and professional objectivity. To let you see all of me, the analytical investigator and the woman who falls apart when you look at her a certain way." Adrian's thumb traced across her knuckles. "I promise to challenge you right back," she continued. "To keep you honest, to question your assumptions, and to never let you take the easy way out." She smiled through sudden tears. "And I promise to love you with the same courage it took to admit that I'd fallen for you in a week. Because sometimes the most rational thing we can do is acknowledge that love doesn't follow logical timelines." When the officiant pronounced them married, Adrian kissed her with a tenderness that belied the intensity of everything they'd been through. And Meredith kissed him back, thinking about how much had changed since she'd walked into his office, expecting to find a corrupt CEO, and found instead someone who made her want to be brave. The reception was beautiful, elegant but warm, expensive but not ostentatious. Adrian's company had recovered remarkably quickly, aided by positive press about his anti-corruption efforts and the ethical business practices Meredith had highlighted in her board presentation. Late in the evening, they slipped away from the celebration to stand on a terrace overlooking the gardens. The October air was crisp, and Adrian wrapped his jacket around Meredith's shoulders. "Any regrets?" he asked, his arms coming around her from behind. "About marrying you? None." She leaned back against his chest. "About how we got here? Sometimes. I wish it had been easier. If it had been easier, it wouldn't be us." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "We're not people who take the easy path." "No," she agreed. "We're definitely not." They stood in comfortable silence, watching fairy lights twinkle in the trees. "I have a wedding gift for you," Adrian said finally. "We agreed no gifts. We agreed no material gifts." He turned her to face him. "This is different." From his pocket, he pulled out a folder. Meredith opened it to find legal documents and corporation papers for a new entity called the Thorne Foundation. "What is this?" "A foundation dedicated to protecting whistleblowers and supporting ethical business practices in developing economies." His eyes were serious, hopeful. "I want you to run it. Use your investigative skills to identify companies that are actually doing good work and help them succeed. Find the next Zofia before she needs rescue." Meredith stared at the documents, at the mission statement that could have been written from her own values, at the substantial funding allocation that would give her the resources to actually make a difference. "This is..." She looked up at him, overwhelmed. "This is everything. This is what you deserve. A way to use your brilliance for something that matters. He cupped her face gently. You changed my life, Meredith. You made me want to be better, do better, risk more. This is my way of saying thank you. She kissed him then, pouring everything she felt, love, gratitude, wonder, into the connection between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Adrian smiled against her lips. Still can't think when I touch you? Never could, Meredith admitted. Never want to. Good, he whispered, echoing the words that had started everything between them. Don't. And as he kissed her again under the stars, Meredith Chen, brilliant investigator, principled analyst, and now wife to a man who'd taught her that the heart's logic was sometimes the most profound, finally, completely surrendered to not thinking at all. Epilogue. 3 years later. The conference room on the 43rd floor of Thorne Industries looked much as it had the first time Meredith had seen it. Floor-to-ceiling windows, expensive furniture, a view that made Chicago look like a game board. But everything else had changed. Meredith stood at the head of the table, presenting the Thorne Foundation's 3-year impact report to a room full of potential donors. Beside her, projected on the screen, were statistics that made her earlier corporate investigations look simple by comparison. We've supported ethical business development in 17 countries, she said, her voice confident and clear. We've provided legal protection for 43 whistleblowers. We've helped establish labor standards at 26 manufacturing facilities. And we've proven that ethical practices and profitability aren't just compatible, they're synergistic. The donors asked questions. She answered them with the precision she'd once applied to hunting corporate fraud, now redirected toward building something sustainable. After the presentation, as people mingled over coffee and pastries, Caroline appeared at her elbow. Adrian called. He's running late from the Berlin meeting but wanted me to tell you he'll be here in time for dinner. Thank you, Caroline. Meredith smiled at the woman who'd become not just an assistant but a friend. How was the quarterly board meeting? Boring, which means successful. Caroline's eyes twinkled. Gerald Hastings retired last month. You'll be pleased to know. The new board member is much more aligned with Adrian's vision. Good. Meredith had stopped tracking Thorne Industries board politics closely, but she still cared about the company's direction. Adrian had continued his ethical expansion strategies, and the results spoke for themselves. Stock prices up, employee satisfaction high, genuine value created. Her phone buzzed with a text. She glanced at it and smiled. Flight landed early. Meet me at the apartment? I have news. She excused herself from the donor event and took the elevator up to the penthouse. Adrian had insisted they keep an office in the building even though they'd bought a house in Lincoln Park. So you're close when I need you, he'd said, which meant at least 3 lunches together per week, and occasional evenings when they'd work side by side in comfortable silence. Adrian was standing at the window when she entered, still in his travel clothes, looking tired but pleased. Berlin went well? She asked, crossing to him. Berlin went perfectly. He turned, pulling her into his arms. The German manufacturing cooperative agreed to partner with us. We'll help them expand into Eastern Europe. They'll train workers in sustainable practices. It's exactly what we've been working toward. That's wonderful. She kissed him softly. You look exhausted. I'm energized. His hands settled on her waist. Because I get to come home to you and tell you about closing deals that actually matter. 3 years of marriage hadn't diminished the intensity between them. If anything, it had deepened attraction, layered with trust, passion, grounded in partnership, desire seasoned with genuine friendship. I have news too, Meredith said. Patricia Kensington contacted me. Adrian's eyebrows rose. From Switzerland? From New York, actually. She's back. Meredith smiled at his surprise. She wants to meet. Says she has information about other corrupt board members in other companies and wants to fund whistleblower protection. Patricia Kensington wants to fund ethical business practices? Adrian shook his head in wonder. You really did change everything, didn't you? We changed everything, Meredith corrected. I found the corruption. You had the courage to fight it. We both paid the price and built something better from the wreckage. My brilliant wife. Adrian kissed her forehead. Always so precise with your language. Your stubborn husband, she countered. Always so determined to give me all the credit. They stood there in the fading afternoon light, holding each other, comfortable in the silence that came from truly knowing another person. Do you remember? Adrian said after a moment. The first time I touched you? In my office? when you were trying so hard to maintain professional distance? I remember thinking you were deliberately sabotaging my investigation. Meredith smiled against his shoulder. I wasn't entirely wrong. I was deliberately seeing if the attraction I felt was mutual. His hand traced down her spine, the same path he'd followed that first day, testing whether you felt it too. I felt it. She shivered slightly at his touch, the same response 3 years later. It terrified me. Still terrify you? Every day. She pulled back to look at him. You still make me forget to think clearly. Still make me question whether I'm making decisions with my head or my heart. Good. His smile was the same one he'd given her that first day, confident, challenging, impossibly attractive. Don't. And then he kissed her, and Meredith surrendered as she had that first day, as she did every day to the beautiful chaos of loving someone who made thinking impossible and feeling inevitable. Later, as they sat together on their couch eating takeout Thai food and reviewing foundation proposals, Meredith's phone buzzed with an email. She glanced at it and felt her pulse kick. What is it? Adrian asked, noting her expression. Detective Morrison. She's been promoted to head of the financial crimes unit. Meredith scanned the email. She wants to know if I'd be interested in consulting on a new case. Major pharmaceutical company. Suspected corruption in drug trials. Adrian set down his food. Are you interested? I don't know. She looked at him. The foundation keeps me busy. But this is the kind of investigation that could actually save lives if someone's manipulating drug trial data. Then you should take it. At her surprised look, he smiled. Meredith, you're brilliant at what you do. Don't let marriage to me limit what you're capable of. It wouldn't be like before, she said carefully. I wouldn't be going in alone. I'd have resources, protection, backup, and you'd have me. He took her hand. Supporting you, protecting you, making sure you remember to eat and sleep, and occasionally think about something other than corporate malfeasance. You'd be okay with me investigating again? I'd be proud of you for using your gifts where they matter most. He kissed her knuckles. Besides, I know better than most what happens when you decide something is important. You don't stop until you've found the truth. Meredith looked at him, this man who'd started as her investigation subject and become her partner in every sense, and felt overwhelmed by gratitude for how much her life had changed. I'll take the case, she decided, on one condition. What's that? You don't touch me while I'm working on it. She smiled at his raised eyebrow. I need to be able to think clearly, and we both know what happens when you touch me. Adrian's smile was slow, dangerous. I make no promises, but I'll try. That's all I ask. They spent the rest of the evening planning Meredith's approach to the new investigation, Adrian's schedule for the next quarter, foundation initiatives they wanted to launch. It was comfortable, domestic, and exactly the kind of partnership Meredith had never let herself imagine before Adrian had walked into her life and demolished every careful boundary she'd constructed. As they prepared for bed, Adrian pulled her close. Do you ever regret it? He asked quietly. Taking that first investigation? Everything that came after? Meredith thought about the woman she'd been so certain of her path, so convinced that emotional distance was in strength, so sure that she could investigate anyone without becoming involved. Never, she said honestly. You taught me that sometimes the most rational thing we can do is admit that love doesn't follow logic. That thinking clearly isn't always more important than feeling deeply. That the best partnerships are the ones that make us braver, not safer. My wise, wonderful wife. Adrian kissed her softly. I love you. I love you too. She smiled against his lips. Even though you completely destroyed my professional objectivity and made me question everything I thought I knew about maintaining emotional distance. Especially because of that, he agreed. And as he made her forget to think once again, Meredith reflected that some investigations led to unexpected conclusions. Some subjects became partners, some professional relationships transformed into something far more valuable, and sometimes, the person you were hired to expose became the person who helped you discover who you were always meant to be. It wasn't the ending she'd planned when she'd walked into Adrian Thorne's office with her tablet full of financial reports and her heart carefully guarded. It was infinitely better.